A clear economic focus on the show today, where we look at the reasoning behind the award of this year's Economics Nobel Prize, as well as the implications of OPEC Plus's decision to cut oil production by 2 million barrels a day. We're also looking at a new deal potentially between Israel and Lebanon that some are seeing as a major diplomatic breakthrough. This is Daily Debrief. I am Siddhant Ani, and we're coming to you from the People's Dispatch studios here in New Delhi. This is the daily news show where we try and find some the real stories behind some of the world's biggest headlines. First up, I quote now, "Modern banking research clarifies why we have banks, how to make them less vulnerable in crises, and how bank collapses exacerbate financial crises." The foundations of this research were laid by Ben Bernanke, Douglas Diamond, and Philip Dybvig in the early 1980s, end quote. That was the release from the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences when it announced its decision to award the three economists the prize for this year in the economic sciences. Of the three, Ben Bernanke is perhaps the most public figure, having chaired US President George W. Bush's Council of Economic Advisors in the lead-up to the subprime mortgage crisis that spurred the global financial crisis of 2007-2008. He then served as chairman of the US Federal Reserve and oversaw the response to that crisis, one that, ironically, he did not see coming. Economist and researcher with Tricontinental Institute of Social Research, Subin Dennis, joined us earlier to understand the work of the three, and Bernanke in particular, plus an examination of how one of the major prizes in world economics impacts the real lives of billions of people around the world. Subin, a very warm welcome to you to Daily Debrief. It's good to have new people and new faces on the show always. We're talking about an issue that is both complex as well as somewhat, funny to a large section of commentators looking at the Nobel Economics Award. And the name of Ben Bernanke particularly jumps out at you when you read that bit of news. Because, of course, most of us know that at the time the 2008 financial crisis hit, he was in charge of the US Federal Reserve. So in that sense, a very public figure, at least compared to the two other economists who are also part of this award for their work. So first up, what do you make of the committee awarding this prize to Bernanke and his colleagues at this point?
Yes, as you said, it is quite funny because the Nobel Committee says that the award was given for research on banks and financial crises, and that the work of this year's Nobel laureates has significantly improved our understanding of the role of banks in the economy, particularly during financial crisis. Now, of course, there are critiques of the narrative of Bernanke and others regarding financial crisis, the role of banks in the economy, and so on, the work that the Nobel Committee refers to. But let me make the points that might be of interest to our viewers. Ben Bernanke had worked on the role of bank collapses during the Great Depression of 1929, 1930s, and so on. So that's the paper that the Nobel Committee most prominently cites. This paper is from 1983. If this work significantly improved our understanding of banks and financial crisis, why is it that he got it so wrong when the great financial crisis broke out in 2007-8? So people have put together some of the comments that Ben Bernanke made during that time. So I would like to quote some of them. In July 2005, when he was the chairman of the US President's Council of Economic Advisors, he said, "House price declines on a nationwide basis in the US are unlikely." In February 2007, when he was already the chairman of the Federal Reserve, he said, "There's not much indication that subprime mortgage issues have spread into the broader mortgage market. Still seems to be healthy." That's what he said. Later, the same year, in July 2007, he said, "The US economy appears likely to expand at a moderate pace over the second half of 2007, with growth then strengthening a bit in 2008 to a rate that is close to the economy's underlying trend." Now, I agree that economic predictions are very tough to make. Taking key decisions as a central bank head as an economic crisis develops, that is also very tough. And it may be the case that his work as a policy maker, may not be particularly relevant as far as the Nobel Prize committee is concerned. But is this the kind of understanding that deserves what is thought to be a top prize? So that is the question that is of importance here, I think. And I would say that decisions such as these would lead to the credibility of the Nobel Economics Prize to further diminish, which would not be a really bad thing, in my opinion.
Absolutely not. Right. So, Subin, if this work that these three economists have done is so vital to our understanding of financial systems, and particularly how banking can help us deal with financial crises as and when they break out, why was the work then insufficient for us to be able to deal better with what happened eventually?
Exactly, that is a very important question. The Nobel laureates this year, their work has focused on the role of rumors in triggering bank runs. Bank runs, when depositors run to the banks to withdraw money, and as more and more people do that, the bank eventually collapses. So that is what their work focuses on. But let me give another view instead. After the Great Depression of the 1930s, the US banking sector became very highly regulated. There was the Glass-Steagall Act of 1993, for instance, which erected a wall between commercial banking and investment banking. Okay, so and of course the banks worked by taking in deposits and giving out loans. So the net interest margin between the two was the main source of their revenue, their returns. Now, this system worked fairly well till the early 1970s, but the banks were mostly private banks, and they wanted returns that were comparable to other sectors, non-banking sectors. So for that, they wanted to take up riskier activities, for which they wanted deregulation. Now, the US government by that time responded to these pressures and deregulated the sector. At the same time, real wages in the US were stagnating since the late 1960s, and higher consumption was being kept up by providing loans, often to people who could not pay them back. And at the same time, financial institutions, after deregulation, they were engaged in riskier activities, which contributed to a bubble, but which had to burst at some point of time. Now, this was something that heterodox economists knew throughout. Marxists, post-Keynesian economists, and so on, all of them knew. But people like Ben Bernanke apparently did not know. That is the funny thing. So if the banks have to be prevented from taking up riskier activities, and if they have to be prevented from pressuring the government to dismantle regulations, then these banks have to be publicly owned. Now, this is an argument that the Indian economist C.P. Chandrasekhar convincingly puts forward in a 2009 paper. And to make just one additional point, capitalism is a crisis return system. And capitalist crises typically have roots in developments in the real economy, and not just rumors and developments in the financial sector alone. But that is a separate discussion altogether.
But since you did mention what happens in the real economy, the impact of these awards and these prizes, particularly something that is as well publicized as the Nobel, has an impact on real economics, on policy that is made around the world, not just limited to, of course, the work that those specific economists do. So in your understanding of things, how does this kind of devalue overall, the science that you are practicing?
Yes, it's of course a question whether economics is an exact science. It is a social science, and of course there are attempts to scientize it and so on. Let me not get into that, but as a practicing social science, economics is deeply impacted by such prizes, definitely. Because in the case of the Nobel Economics Prize, it has mostly tended to reflect the biases of the Nobel Prize Committee. And that bias has been in favor of a certain kind of economics, mostly mainstream economics. And within that, neoclassical economics, monetarism, new classical economics, and so on. So, for example, it has been awarded to people like Milton Friedman. His students inaugurated neoliberalism in Chile under the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet. So given its history, we would expect that this prize will usually go to economists who will not question the status quo. And experience tells us that economists who make any kind of fundamental critique of capitalism, they are certainly out of contention. Okay, so that is why some real giants of economics like Mikhail Kalesky or Joanne Robinson, were not awarded the Nobel Prize because they are left-wing economists. Now, it is notable that the Nobel Economics Prize tends to almost always goes to economists from the global north. Just 3 economists from third world countries have been awarded this prize: Arthur Lewis, Amartya Sen, and Abhijit Banerjee. And all 3 of them actually mainly worked in the universities in the US, UK, and so on. So basically, the prize goes to economists who work in universities in the global north. I think there is only one exception, and that was Leonid Kantorovich, who was at a university in the Soviet Union. Now, as you said, whether we like it or not, the Nobel Prize has an impact because it gets a lot of publicity. And when the Nobel Economics Prize is awarded to an economist, it also implies that the ideas of that economist also gets promoted. Okay. So given the biases of the Nobel Prize committee, this has meant the promotion of very conservative ideas in economics. There are some notable exceptions like Amartya Sen and Joseph Stiglitz and so on. But mostly the kind of ideas that wouldn't rock the boat of capitalism much. And more often than not, these kinds of ideas have wreaked havoc in the lives of billions, not millions, but actually billions of people across the world. So unfortunately, the Nobel Economics Prize this year also falls in the same category.
Thanks very much, Subin, for at least trying your best to sum up this entire story in a way that most of us will be able to digest and understand, and put forward that important critique of what has become a well-publicized prize, but one that needs to definitely be questioned, along with sort of the underlying economic ideas that it seems to be promoting. Thanks again.
Thank you so much.
Israel and Lebanon do not currently have official diplomatic relations, and the two neighbors remain technically at war. However, Israel has announced a deal with Lebanon that is being seen by some as a historic diplomatic breakthrough. The subject of the deal is a maritime dispute in the eastern Mediterranean. Israel is already exploiting 2 gas fields in the region, and Lebanon hopes for similar possibilities. The dispute has been on since 2011, when the two states declared overlapping maritime boundaries in the eastern Mediterranean and the UN was asked to mediate. Dr. Abdul Rahman is back on the show to talk about this important developing story and its implications. Abdul, we're talking to you about 2 stories. The first of them, of course, is deal that's been announced between Israel and Lebanon. Hopes then that a border dispute, a maritime boundary dispute that's been ongoing since 2011 can be resolved in the near future, perhaps?
So we know that there has been negotiations going on between Israel and Lebanon over the status of the Karish oil field, which earlier Israel claimed its own territory and sent its exploratory missions there, Evergene. And since then, Hezbollah has threatened of kind of grave consequences if this oil explorations continues. So because of the Hezbollah's threat, the explorations has already stopped, and US started mediating. And it seems that mediation has brought a result, which basically means that a part of the gas field will be transferred to Lebanon as per the whatever minute details are there in public. A part of the gas field will be given to Lebanon, and the rest of the gas field will remain with Israel. So both the sides will share a part of that whatever revenue which will be generated from the gas deal. So Lebanese president yesterday claimed that this is Lebanon has been satisfied with whatever has been discussed, and even Hezbollah is not saying much criticism, is not very critical about it. So overall, it seems that there is a positive development. A conflict, a dispute which could have led to a conflict in the region, seems that there has been some kind of a resolution achieved.
Right. So, in a wider context, Abdul, because formal diplomatic ties do not exist between Lebanon and Israel, could this be the starting point of perhaps a widening of diplomatic interactions between two sides and a move away from or move towards perhaps de-escalating any other potential flashpoints?
I don't think so. We should remember that this deal is primarily, uh, not primarily, I think to a very large extent, is basically a doing of the US pressures. Right. We know that the in Lebanese politics, US has a very strong say, and US has its primarily because of the historical quote unquote links the ruling classes in Lebanon has had with US. Apart from that, also the US has a very close links and a very significant interest with Israeli regime. So, given that the interest which US had in this deal is basic reason that whatever little has been achieved, this of course will not lead to the kind of relationship you are hinting to for various reasons. First of all, even the deal is not final yet. We know there are objections in Israel. Netanyahu, the leader of the opposition, and quite popular, it seems that the fifth election which is coming, which can go either way. Netanyahu has been criticizing the deal, claiming that this Naftali Bennett government has, Yair Lapid government, the prime minister has changed quite often in Israel. Yair Lapid government has sold out Israeli interest to Hezbollah and all. So after the election, whether the deal will stand or not, we don't know. In Lebanon itself, Hezbollah is not very positive about it, though they are saying, though they do not have much objections to it at this moment, but we do not know what ultimately will happen in few months. Even this deal is not very sure. And over and above that, Hezbollah has a strong commitment to the Palestinian cause. Yesterday, Hassan Nasrallah, Hezbollah chief, frankly said, quite clearly said that the deal is very temporary arrangement. Even if it happens, we should not be very positive about what will happen to our relationship with Israel, because we recognize Palestine, and until there is a there is a resolution on the Palestinian issue, there cannot be any relationship with Israel. So, given the larger politics of the region, larger politics of Hezbollah, and the Hezbollah's influences Lebanese politics and Israeli politics, the equations Israeli politics itself, we are not very sure that what way the deal will lead to. But one thing we are very sure about it, that this is not the beginning of a quote unquote normalization of Israel-Lebanon relationship.
Thanks very much for putting that into context and letting us, very clearly know that it is a very limited conversation in relation to a very limited sort of subject matter only pertaining to these oil fields, and should be looked at as such, and also perhaps within the larger context of what's going on with the Russia-Ukraine conflict and overall energy issues around the world, which will take us to our next story, Abdul. So we'll be back with you in a minute. I know you're on the move, so thank you for taking the time. We'll come back to you in just a minute. And finally, there will be consequences, is what US President Joe Biden has warned his frenemies in Saudi Arabia after the OPEC Plus grouping decided to cut oil production targets by as much as 2 billion barrels a day, despite some serious pressure from the United States. The Saudi side has argued that the move was driven purely by economic factors and taken unanimously by the group's 23 members, and aimed at stabilizing oil prices globally in the wake of interest rate hikes by central banks in attempts to curb inflation. Now the White House says it will re-evaluate its relationship with the kingdom, but stopped well short of saying how that re-evaluation would take place and what sort of consequences there might be. Abdul is still with us and has more details on this story. So, Abdul, strong words from the US president there in the context of Saudi Arabia and that sort of the frenemy sort of equation that the two countries or the two governments seem to have with one another. How are you perceiving this development in relation to the OPEC Plus decision to cut oil production targets?
I think it is quite clear that OPEC, if we see technically, and I think various OPEC leaders have claimed that this is a technical decision, this is an economic decision, this has nothing to do with the larger politics. and it is given the reports which are coming from different parts of the world and the overall status of the world economy there, which is moving towards recession, and oil prices are already for those who are producing the oil, for them it is quite low from what it was in July. So $120 per barrel, it has come down to 90, around 90, and even less than that. So for them, it is an economic decision to kind of keep the prices at a certain level, because prices at that level means a kind of economic stability in their own countries. So from the OPEC side, the economic logic and technical logic is quite solid. Of course, there is a larger repercussion on global prices, which is already quite high. The common people are going to suffer, and they're already suffering, because this will have a kind of impact on most of the prices of most of the other commodities. That is one part of it. But when you talk about politics behind it, and particularly the way US is reacting to it, that claiming that the OPEC has sold out to Russia, they have taken side to Russia. Basically, this particular standing comes from the uh, uh, because of the lack of any good word, the frustration which Biden administration is facing at this moment. Despite all attempts Biden had made in last few months to basically persuade Saudis, we should remember the Saudis are the one country, is the one country which can individually influence the overall production and global prices of oil. So if Saudis are convinced, Biden thought, then the production will rise instead of going down, uh, and that this did not happen because there was a large different kinds of stakes involved with the overall production and the prices and everything in the US or the Biden administration. So the failure is basic reason that the Biden is reacting the way it is. He's reacting.
You pointed to the frustration, Abdul, that the Biden administration is encountering, I think, on multiple fronts. We were talking on Daily Debrief yesterday about the export controls on semiconductor chips to China and how US allies, even there, allies like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan even, are reluctant to kind of buy into the US stand on this, with China being such a huge market. And we are seeing increasing opposition around the world to a blanket sort of towing of the US line or following of US interests in various regions. What kind of impact do you think this will have with the midterms just around the corner for Biden?
We should talk about midterms in a while. First, US, whether the Biden has the capacity, or the US administration has the capacity to break the relationship with Saudi Arabia as they are claiming. The Democratic congressmen who are trying to persuade the Biden administration to change the orientation towards Saudi Arabia and all, I think that is bogus, to say the least. Primarily because the U.S. armament industry, the U.S. Various industries which rely on Saudi investments, given the Saudis' strategic relevance, in the West Asia, given all those things and many more. So what I'm trying to say that given the Saudi's strategic importance, strategic and economic importance for US, it is not the Saudis which need US that much now, given the changes in the global politics in the last few years, but the US which needs Saudis more. And therefore, this threat is by and large an empty threat, and it's basically addressed to the midterm elections which are coming, to the voters in the midterm elections. It is an attempt to by kind of pacify the Republicans' criticism that Biden has failed to tame even the Saudis and even retain its close allies in the region. So if the as far as the impact on the prices is concerned in the US, it is going to be very severe, primarily for two reasons. One, the Biden administration is already releasing oil from its strategic reserves for quite a long time, and they cannot continue with that any longer, given the fact that the overall reserves are dangerously low at this moment, and they don't want to take a risk of kind of in a situation where there is nothing. There is nothing strategic about their strategic reserves. So they don't want to do that. So they cannot reduce it, cannot release much more oil at this moment. One. Second, the given the fact that the larger condition in US and the way the pricing is happening, the 2 billion barrels per day reduction is a huge reduction, and it will have an impact in US as well.
And perhaps then it's a deliberate measure that the details of this so-called re-evaluation of the US's relationship with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia are unknown, and we will perhaps later on find out who or what mechanism will even evaluate what the re-evaluation might be. All right, thanks, Abdul. We'll let you go. I know there's plenty of disturbance. Apologize to our viewers also for the audio interference, but Abdul is on the road. So thanks again for taking the time to talk to us on Daily Debrief today, and safe travel to you. That wraps things up. Once again, apologies for the slightly poor audio at times with Abdul's connection. For more details on these stories and all of the other work we do, as always, we invite you to head over to our website, peoplesdispatch.org, and don't forget to give us a follow on the social media platform of your choice. We'll be back with another episode of the Daily Debrief tomorrow, same time, same place. Until then, I hope you stay safe. Goodbye.